this is Emily. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to discuss with you how to tackle big books of classic literature or large classic novels. So why did I think this was an important topic to discuss? Point blank, it is because so many people are put off by reading works of classic literature because of their size. And I've heard time and time again from my students teaching at college that if the books were not so big, I would read more of them. Or if the books were not 800 pages or 1,000 pages or 1,200 pages, I would read them all, that they just can't handle books that big. They can't stick with books that big. They are overwhelmed and they feel a sense of dread thinking about reading books that big. So they put it off, or they put those in the back of their shelf, and they gravitate toward the shorter books. So we're going to discuss how to tackle big books so you can get through your 100 greatest classics list, or you can get through the greatest books ever written and feel that sense of accomplishment, that sense of pride, that deep, fulfilling sense of having read the books that so few amount of people in the world ever sit down to really take the time to not only read, but study. So first, when talking about how to tackle big books, I'm going to ask you, how do you tackle giant books like this? This is Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace, known to have 1,000 characters and over 1,000 pages, written in a series of 5 different pieces put together as an epic fiction. So how do you tackle War and Peace? Have you read War and Peace? If you haven't, do you want to read War and Peace? Other giant books we might think of would be like Middlemarch by Eliot and George Eliot. And so my question to you is, how do you tackle reading a book like this, like War and Peace? So what I would ask you in exchange is, how do you tackle a book, small book, such as A Room with a View by E.M. Forster, that barely has 200 pages, which was written in 1908 and is also a work of classic literature, but a nice small book, fairly easy read, reads like a novel, nothing too difficult. How do you tackle reading a book that's around 200 pages that's a piece of classic literature? Or I'm going to ask you, how do you tackle reading something written in 500 BC by Aesop, such as from this Penguin Little Black Classics, lesser known works, that is barely 60 pages and has just little bits on each page? How would you tackle a complicated work that is this old, such as the Dolphins, the Whales, and the Gudgeon? How would you tackle reading this compared to how would you tackle reading this? So the first thing I want to tell you is there is no difference when you are reading little bits of classic literature or gigantic bits of classic literature. It is still the same as if you were reading, I don't have one here, but I would show you, a modern day novel. It is word after word, line after line, page after page. It just takes a little longer. There is no difference. You can have a very small, or you can have somewhat small, or you can have medium length, like Henry James' The Bostonians, of classic literature, that is equally as complicated, challenging, and insightful to those time periods and time consuming as this one. It just takes a little longer. So there's really no difference tackling small bits of classic literature to large, huge chunks of classic literature. And I'm going to give you some pointers specifically to help you and encourage you to get through these large bits of classic literature, these big books, so it feels less overwhelming, so it feels less dreadful, so it feels less intimidating, and you're less likely to want to put it off. So my first bit of information I want to give you is to pick a copy. I have one here that you can write in. So my favorite classic piece of literature is The Bostonians by Henry James. Love it. It's my precious. I love it so much. So this is why I buy these Barnes & Noble classics. You can also buy the normal full size of the Penguin classics, the traditional black versions of any of these classic novels. They're generally $10 or less, maybe $8.99, maybe $12, depends on which one. Pick a copy you can write in. That is my first tip. pick a copy you can write in. Go to eBay, pick up a used copy if you don't want to buy a brand new copy. I like my books crisp and new. I don't want to risk getting a book someone else has written in. Certainly you can go to a used bookstore and get inexpensive Penguin classics or any used version of any of these classics you want to read for maybe $3, $4, $5. But for double the price, I would rather buy it new because this is my book. I want the pages crisp and clean. I want to write it in my way, and I want to develop a collection. I do not recommend using a library for your classics because you cannot write in them. Now, there are alternatives to that, which I'll discuss. But for example, pick a copy you can write in. So let me show you an example of how I get through all pieces of classic literature, large or small. So you might see here, I have little notes, I have brackets, I have little notes, I have things that are underlined. I have here words that are circled. I have important things written down with notes. I have some pages that have a little markings. I have some pages that have a lot of markings. In War and Peace, let me show you, for example, in War and Peace is a whole different animal. War and Peace in itself, there are specific ways I would recommend reading. But I have actual colored highlights. I have circles. Every time I come across a new character, I circle it. Every time I come across a vocabulary word I don't know, I circle it. Every time every few pages, I'll write a little, that's what you see in the bottom of the Bostonians here. You'll see me write some little bits of info. I have some books that have a lot more markings, but every now and again, I will write, every few pages, I'll write what's going on. You know, if it's War and Peace, you know, Natasha is XYZ discussing this, or Pierre is doing XYZ doing this. Every few pages, I'll do like a few line summary. So in the future, when I'm flipping through the book, I'll kind of remember what's going on in those pages if I want to refer back to it in the future. At the end of my markings of my books, I'll go through and pull out all the vocabulary words I didn't know or wasn't sure of that I circled, and I'll put them in a list. I'll type them out. I've just increased my vocabulary. For names and character names, I circle and I highlight. And I highlight because I want to be able to flip through and see that pink or that yellow or that green and find the characters. And just the act of circling and highlighting a name will help you remember. War and Peace, for example, I will keep a notebook, and as I come across a character, circle, highlight, and then I go to my notebook, I write them down, and a few lines on who they are and what their status is, something to remember them by that will stick out. So that is my first tip. Is classic literature is meant to be studied, not meant to be read just for entertainment. It is more about the language, the flow, the syntax, the time period, the history, the lessons. We want to study actively. We don't want to read passively. You want to be able to write in your books. That is my first tip to tackle the big books. So my second tip, if I can find it, when you get a large book, let's say War and Peace, we're using an example. You could do this with any other book, Bleak House by Charles Dickens, Middlemarch, any book, Fairy Queen, Edmund Spencer. When you get a big book, I want you to explore it before you start reading inside it out. I want you to thoroughly read the back cover slowly until you understand. I want you to read the introduction in the beginning by whoever is introducing the work. You can learn a lot from the introduction, which is usually by a different author. I want you to kind of explore the table of contents. I want you to look at any timelines in here I want you to read through. I want you to look at any character dossiers or a cast of characters. If you're reading something by Anton Chekhov or a play, you'll have a cast of characters in there. I want you to familiarize yourself with the length of the chapter. So go to chapter 1, flip through, see how many pages it is until you get to a page break. Look at chapter 2, chapter 3. How often are there page breaks, or are there page breaks, or are there scene breaks? Is it just solid chapters? I want you to familiarize yourself with what you're getting into and become comfortable with what you're going to dive into before you start, instead of just picking up and reading. So that is another very important tip. I want you to also see if you can find, if it doesn't have a character dossier in the beginning, like we're looking at the Bostonians or we're looking at any other classic work, I want you to go online and pull up a cast of characters for that book and know who your cast is ahead of time. After all, a work of literary fiction is like a play or like a movie. We have a cast of characters. And if you know the cast of characters, at least the most important ones before you start, you're going to have a much easier time as you come across each of these characters in the book. You're going to recognize them. And it's almost like if you have your brother or your sister tells you about a friend of theirs a few times. And then when you finally meet that friend, oh, this is Jane. Oh, I know all about Jane. I've heard XYZ about you. You already feel like you know the person. You're already familiar. You're going to feel more like you can relate instead of this is, oh, who is this person? What are they all about? So you're already going to know that before you run into them in the story. So it will not interrupt your flow of understanding the story. So I want you to look up a cast of characters, read through it. You can find it online. Sometimes you can find it in the book. Maybe write a few notes down ahead of time so you are familiar with who you are going to be diving into the world of before you start. So I want you then to go look up, let's see if I have this actual website where you can get, what is that website? There's a website where you can get character dossiers. If I find it, I'll link it below. So anyway, yeah, I can't remember the name of it. Oh, what is it called? Oh, I'm thinking. I don't remember. I don't want to look it up on my computer now. But next thing I want you to do is I want you to pull up book reviews on the book. I want you to go to the Amazon page or anywhere, Goodreads, read reviews of the book, get familiar with what other people say, what they like, what they don't like, so you can feel more comfortable and prepared when you get in there, so you know what to expect, so you're more open-minded. So, you know, if you read some negative reviews, you can decide for yourself if you think that, or you think something different. That actually is a nice way to challenge yourself when you're getting into these works. I also want you to go onto YouTube and see if you can find any lectures or reviews of the book and hear other people talking about it before you read it. Again, increase your confidence, increase your familiarity, have some basis to the story, have some background ahead of time. Think, you know, hear about some of the other critiques and or analysis of the work, so you are entering into that piece of literature with an open mind who is also scanning for your own opinion and recognition of these symbols or these metaphors or these analogies or these opinions that other, you know, scholars have, or professors, or just booktubers if you really just want to listen to booktubers. So you can enter with this sense of exploration to see, do I agree? What do I think? This person thinks that. Well, let's see for myself. So that kind of makes it more fun and challenging. And you feel a lot more ready, I think, when you've read reviews and listened to reviews and listened to some analysis or lectures of the book before you enter into the book. So another tip I have for you, I don't even know what number we're on. I think we're on number 5. I want you to see if there is a movie, cinema, rendition of the work. War and Peace, for example, there are several. Now, I know what you're going to say. Never watch the movie before you read the book because it will spoil the whole thing for you. Well, you know, we're not reading suspense fiction. We're not reading a James Patterson novel or a Stephen King novel or a Jack Reacher novel that, you know, we're all in it for the dopamine rush of the hanging on the edge of your seat or the whodunit like you get in an Agatha Christie novel. We're here to study and to learn and to challenge ourselves and to accomplish goals and bucket list items by getting through these works. We're not here for the mystery of it. We're not here for the every little, you know, bit. I mean, let's face it, most of these classic literature pieces are not meant to be suspense, are not meant to have cliffhangers or surprises, you know, so we're not in it for that. We're in it to study the work. So it's okay if you see a movie or see a rendition of a very complicated piece of literature before you read it. I've done both. I've read works and then watched the movies, like the Thunderbirds, for example, or I have watched movies first, or the miniseries BBC, such as War and Peace, and then I've read the work. I've done both, and I have not found that it diminishes my pleasure or enjoyment of the work in any way or ruined anything for me. I can absolutely say for difficult novels, even for Pride and Prejudice, I did this, that watching a movie first before reading really, really helped my enjoyment factor of the work. Because when you think about it, these books can be so difficult so dry, sometimes so complicated, and you have to have a very, very vivid imagination to try to visualize the historical time period that is happening in this book with little key words and sentences and syntax and hints by the author. We have to envision the costumes, the manner of speech, the societal norms, what the rooms looked like, what the streets looked like, what the modes of transportation looked like, what their, chinas they're using looked like, or, what kind of hats and jewels and makeup were being used. I mean, these books are written in time periods where we did not exist. These were worlds we do not know that are so different than our world. So you spend so much mental energy in diving into a classic work dry, which I mean with no pre-context or visual, trying to get a visual on the scene. So if you're reading War and Peace, for example, you're entering into the beginning scenes where we're at a soiree, by a high society single woman or widow, a soiree, and there are people there and soldiers and princes and talking and socializing, and there's not a ton of description in the costume, and it's dry. You're meeting a ton of people. It's difficult, and a lot of people jump ship after the first chapter if they can even make it. But when you watch the movie, I think it's Polanski's, is it the BBC, like an 8-part miniseries? I think it's done by Polanski. I can't remember, but it's the most closest to War and Peace, for example, that I've read. And I can tell you that even just watching the first episode of the miniseries gets you through like the first 5 or 6 chapters. Like, it was night and day. And so when I watched that first, and when I started reading War and Peace, from the beginning, I could already see, Philippe in my mind, or I could already see the Prince Alexei or the little pregnant princess. Like, I could see all these people already in my mind, how they talk, how they dress, what their hair color is, the scene, the setting of what's going on. I can almost hear the noise in the chapters when I remember the party noise, or the kind of the sorority or fraternity noise of when Philippe goes to see all the drunk guys. I can already see it. So I can just focus on the writing style, the language, the details that are not covered in the movie. All the language and dialogue and the character building in between. I don't have to spend any time trying to get a visual on who these people are or what they look like or what's going on during that time. Or I even understood more about, the Napoleonic Wars by watching that, so I can understand the discussions they're having about wars. So in cases of classic books you're challenged by, do not be afraid to watch the movie first. I can give you one example. Outlander, more of a modern novel, listed as one of the 100 greatest books ever written by PBS. Outlander won the very first book, and I tried to read Outlander before I ever saw the series. And I have to say, Outlander, the series, is one of my favorite television series ever made. Like, I've probably watched the whole thing 5 times. I'm like dying for the next season. I absolutely love it. Well, I could not get through more than maybe a half of the first book before the show came out, because of the Scottish dialect by Jamie and his clan was so broken. The way that Diana Gabaldon wrote the character's speech, it slows you down, the flow. You're reading about a scene and the description and the nature and the woods, and all of a sudden you're come to a dead halt because Jamie's talking and the broken dialect, and you're trying to I couldn't really ever get a visual on him, or I never heard a lot of this this language, this accent before, and I couldn't really translate it in my mind from the writing into my mind, and it took forever, and I didn't enjoy it. It felt like work, and I gave up. Well, when I saw this series, I was in love, and I was floored, and after seeing the whole series up until where it left off, I went back and I read that book again, and the second book, and no problems, because I can see Jamie, I can hear him, I can see, his uncle, I can see everybody in there, and I didn't have to, suddenly all that broken dialect, all the way the author, Diana Gabaldon wrote it, it didn't slow me down anymore. It didn't kill it. It was like, I breezed through it. similar if you're trying to read something like Mark Twain or Huckleberry Finn. So you'll run into a lot of that same issue. So do not be afraid to see the movie first. Okay, so my next tip here, I have my computer. Set a timeline to accomplish your daily reading count. So we have War and Peace is over 1,000 pages. It's actually broken up into 300 and something chapters. I forget the exact amount, but it's very close to exactly 1 year. You could figure I'm going to read 1 chapter a day for 360 whatever days, and I'll finish this book in a year. Or you can read 2 chapters a day, and you can finish that book in 6 months. Or you can read 3 chapters a day and finish it in 3 months. So take the word count. So if we're reading Henry James, we have 300 and 414 pages. So let's say you read on average 50 pages a day, or you want to read 40 pages a day. You're going to take the 414, you're going to divide it by 30, and that's how many pages you read a day. Let's say you want to read this book in 10 days. Well, you're going to read 40 pages a day, 41 pages a day, divide that by whatever. So do a little math, set a timeline and an end goal, what you can realistically read each day, which includes annotations and writing in the book, and stick with it, put it in your calendar. That will help you keep you on target, etc., etc., etc. Okay, my next tip is to take a class or a support group, or maybe a meetup, or listen to lectures, or find a mentor or a teacher, someone like me, for example, or similar, or a literature class that covers Russian literature, or that will discuss and cover not only this book, several of the books you are looking to discuss. A mentor, someone, or even a group to discuss the works with, to hear other perspectives you hadn't thought of, to hear what other people are thinking about it, to ask questions people can clarify for you that you couldn't, to have someone teach you about the time period and the context and how this literary work relates to other literary works, on and on and on. You want to have some educational framework around the work, or the author, or the genre. If you're really serious about becoming a literary scholar and you want to learn and live and check off bucket list these greatest works, that is the way that I would do it. I have a final tip for you that I have always used, I love a great deal. You have your handy little iPhone. I recommend 2 things. One or the other, or both, is to use your little voice recorder memo. So whenever you are done studying or reading a chapter in whichever book you're reading, hit record on your little audio, do some dictation, paraphrase what you think you just read. You know, chapter 1, we go into this soiree setting, and you know, we meet these characters, and this is happening, and this is being discussed, and this is approximate time period. You know, 2, 3, 4 minute annotation, what you want to remember. Simply the act of paraphrasing what you read, of recording, saying out loud, and having to reiterate it, makes you think. It taps into different parts of your brain. It also helps to solidify what you just read deeper into your long-term memory, which will help you 3 months down the road when you're still trying to read this piece of work. You can also refer back to these notes if you're going to do things like write papers, do projects, teach it in class. So it's extremely helpful to engage your other senses when studying literature. Hence, we have the touch, we have the writing, the notes. When you speak, you can also hear your own voice. We have the sight of the actual reading. You can play back, you can hear what you've written. So this really will help you get through these books and remember. Also, I like to use my absolute favorite app. It is called Bookly. Bookly, you can download it free from I think the Apple, the Google store. I have app on iPhone, and it's free trial, but I think it's like $4 a month, or I don't know what. I think I have the advanced version. It's like $4.99 a month, and it's bloody fantastic. And you can upload. There's like a spinning wheel. You can upload books you want to read, and then you can mark each one like currently reading, finished, or going to read. Whenever it's time to sit down and read, you're reading the Bostonians, for example. Tap on that book. It shows the book cover. It opens full on the screen, and you hit record. Or no, start timer, and it will. And you set your phone down, and you can get in your 30 minutes or your 40 minutes, and it times you, and it records your hours of reading. And when it's running, if you come across a passage you like that you've underlined or starred. So there's a section in your Bookly app for quote. You hit quote, you put in the page number, and you can auto audio dictate your quote, read it out loud, and it keeps a log. Or there's a tab for a thought. If you have a certain thought you want to remember as you're reading and you can't put very much down on your annotations, hit thought, say it, audio, push the button, it records the thought. There's also a button for new words or vocabulary that you come across. And when you're done with your reading session, you hit done. You can, it asks you to do 1 minute reading reflection. You can audio dictate, verbal dictate, same as you would have in your audio recorder, as I discussed. And also do a rating, and then it's done. And then there's a tab in there, you know, you're doing that for days or weeks and reading different books. There's a tab in there that shows you each month or each year your reading hours. And you can access every book, all your notes, your quotes, your thoughts, your vocab, what you thought of it, your reviews you do at the end, and then there's a whole menu where it shows all the books you finished. Once you mark a book finished, you get badges and rewards, and then you go in there and you can see, I have 25 books finished in the last 6 months, and it shows you the cover of them, like in a gallery, bright and pretty. I love it. Really makes you feel like you're getting through something. So that's another way you can do it if you don't want to use your audio recorder. So those are my tips. I'm pretty sure I got them all. Checking my notes. Nope, that's all my notes. So again, remember, small or large, it's just word after word, line after line, paragraph after paragraph, and page after page, and chapter after chapter. It just takes a little longer. So if you're challenged by it, ask yourself, why do you need books that are short, that you have to get through fast? Because as soon as you finish, you're going to get on to the next one. So you're still going to be reading anyway. So what does it matter if it's longer or shorter? We are so programmed in this day and age to get through everything quickly. Books are written so small today, and we get right into the action, and we want to binge watch Netflix, and binge watch Hulu, and binge watch Amazon Prime, and we want to get through things fast so we can get on to the next one with this hurry mentality. But in the end, you're just watching more things for the same period of time as if you're watching or reading less things in the same period of time, but more substantial. So don't let the length of any work ever stop you from reading. I hope this video was helpful. Please subscribe if you haven't. Give me a thumbs up. Tell me what you think. Help me spread the word. And I'll see you in another video.